Let me welcome you to this first National Dialogue Conference, which we give a theme as Reconcile and Restore Kenya through Structured Dialogue Communique, with the first National Dialogue Conference mounted by the men and women of faith and the civil society, including the members we have mentioned here. This first National Dialogue, NDC 1 as we call it, was convened by the Dialogue Conference Group and has been here at the Fungamano House in Nairobi from the 11th of September to the 13th, today is September 2018. The National Dialogue Conference brought together over 600 delegates from across the nation who included religious men and women, communities of men and women, youth and persons with disabilities, and leaders, as well as representatives from civil society, business community, and trade unions. The objective of the National Dialogue Conference was to initiate an inclusive dialogue process to effectively address the political and governance crisis in Kenya. Delegates also generated content for the dialogue process and outlined the key principles, strategies, structures for the dialogue process. The conference drew wisdom from the scriptures in the Bible in Isaiah 1:18, which says or reads, "Come now, let us reason together, says the Lord." And also from Quran chapter Surah verse 38, which reads, and I quote, "Dialogue amongst yourselves," end quote. Delegates were inspired, Delegates were inspired from God that dialogue is important to resolve conflicts and disputes. The rationale of the National Dialogue. In our continuous assessment of the state of the nation, the Dialogue Conference Group has found that virtually at all government and social, public and private institutions in Kenya suffer legitimate crisis. As a result, different attempts to reform the nation, driven by individuals, institutions, have also had a challenge. Some have failed. It is notable that the formation of coalition governments since in the year 2002 and 2008, the promulgation of the new constitution in 2010, and the recent handshake between His Excellency the President and the Right Honorable Raila Odinga Amolo did not and has not fully resolved the underlying causes of conflict. The National Dialogue Conference, therefore, nonetheless, appreciates that the handshake between the two have produced a calmness in our nation that portends a golden opportunity for the nation to reflect and find solutions to the perennial conflicts that emerge after every elections. It is in this context that the Dialogue Conference Group has initiated this national dialogue process so that Kenyans have a chance to build consensus on pathways to national cohesion, equality, and justice as envisaged by our Constitution 2010. As outlined in the framework for the national dialogue developed by the DRG The National Dialogue Conference intensively discussed 7 dialogue agenda items and now recommends the following solution to each of one of those 7 agendas. And I invite now my member on the left, Archbishop Ndambuki, to give us the first one, which is
the concerned position of the National Dialogue Conference that the purpose of economic development should be poor improvement of the people's productivity and lives, not merely undertaking projects that increase consumerism. Seeking to improve the lives of Kenyans, the National Dialogue Conference recommends the following. A special youth socioeconomic empowerment session paper being developed within a year to galvanize a national intervention to address the youth unemployment crisis in the country. B, the 16% value-added tax on petroleum products be scrapped immediately as it is adding the citizens of Kenya, yet no value has been added on the fuel that is imported to warrant such a cost transfer to consumers. The government should instead focus on reduction of wastage and the wage bill rather than trying to raise more funds through taxation. An independent forensic audit of the national debts be undertaken immediately to establish who is owned, how much they are owned, the terms of the debts, process for which the money was borrowed, and if the debts were actually invested for the purpose they were intended. If Parliament does not commence the process within 6 months, or if the exercise is not undertaken fully and satisfactorily, then Dialogue Reference Group will set up a People's Nation Debt Audit Task Force to undertake the assignment. The government immediately stops borrowing for infrastructure projects. In particular, the proposed expansion of the Nairobi-Mombasa Highway should be suspended for now, since the standard gauge railway is intended to decongest the current highway. Focus should be put on increasing the usage of the SGR to make it worthy the colossal investment made to build it. Further, the Naivasha to Malaba extension of the SGR should be suspended, since the country is broken and cannot even feed its own people. Kenya must avoid recolonization through debt, as has been witnessed in other countries. The National Assembly must forthwith use its powers and tools to ensure that Treasury prepares a balanced budget based on our national income to stop the trend of borrowing to cover budgetary deficits. A Kenya National Economic Transformation Master Plan be developed, which will part guide the setting up of cottage industries and expand productivity in counties and promote youth employment. Parliament should pass a session paper to effect this within 1 year. The presidency should, within 3 months, present to Parliament a cohesive statement on the Northern Rangelands Trust, and especially to respond to the concerns that major land and natural resources, have been annexed in northern Kenya for foreigners. The presidency should outline the country's strategy to conserve rivers, wetlands, and all water towers in the context of a wider climate change adaptation and mitigation strategy. County and the national government should enhance service delivery to all Kenyans with a special focus on food security and the increase in access to health services. Public officers and the state officials to be required by law to only receive health services from public health facilities. Counties be required to entrench public participation in the identification of community needs and priority projects.
Corruption has permeated every sector of the Kenyan society to the point where it was become the social norm. To pursue of the corruption in Kenya, that community members often prone to those who are not corrupt and instead reward the corrupt by electing them to political offices. The symbolic relationship between politics and corruption impedes the transparency and accountability. The decisive deal with corruption, the National Dialogue Conference recommends the following. Number 1A, corruption should be declared a national disaster so that its eradication is the national commitment and an engagement undertaken to the discretion of the President. B, there should be development a corruption tackling strategy that draws line between old corruption and the new corruption. Old corruption should be addressed through a mechanism for voluntary surrender of assets corruptly taken from the state and the disclosures of co-conspiration in return of the amnesty from prosecution. The conditional amnesty is to be availed for the only 1 year. Those who confess to having engaged in corruption should be barred from holding public office for a period of time. New corruption, which is any corruption engaged after the commencement of the amnesty period, must then be ruthlessly tackled through the forceful seizure of the assets and jailing of the corrupt for life. The same should apply those who engaged in old corruption but do not take advantage of the amnesty offered. The Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission should be restructured to serve as the serious crimes unit with the investigative and prosecutive powers, while regular corruption cases are dealt with by the Director of Criminal Investigation and the Director of Public Prosecutions. D, the National Assembly must be immediately pass a Conflict of Interest Act which will stop public officers, state officers, political leaders, their spouses, children and respective from doing business with the government at the national county level. The injunction should also apply to elect officials who previously were practicing law, who should be barred from personal respecting clients in the court during their tenure in office. Their law firms should, however, not be stopped from providing services to their clients. Any officials who breach this act should face punitive measures and include being required the permanent quiet politicals to go and do business. E, religious institutions should not accept public donations or contributions from elect or appointed political leaders or state officials that are given with the fanfare. Contributions from such persons should be anonymous and personal like those of all other worships. Religious institutions should not be seen the channels for sensitizing corrupt individuals. F, Article 99(3) must be repealed to remove the lacuna that allows the politicians to vie for effective office even when they are faced with integrity, corruption, or criminal cases in the court of law. The IEBC should be empowered to bar through vetting any individuals with such integrity questions until they have been cleared and found not culpable. The Campaign and Finance Act must be strictly enforced to ensure that only monies from legitimate sources are invested in political campaigns. Further, spending by political parties during campaigns must be limited to what is strictly necessary. Deliberate efforts fully funded by the exchequer to roll out, create awareness and mobilize citizens to actively participate in fighting and preventing corruption and its management of public affairs.
Constitutional and legal reforms. In light of the big stakes that accompany presidential elections, with resultant incidences of tensions and violence, questions have been raised regarding the efficacy of maintaining the system of government as we have today. These have been coupled with sentiments that the Constitution of Kenya 2010 gave Kenya more government rather than better government. To remedy this, the National Dialogue Conference recommends the following. A. Audit of the implementation of the Constitution be undertaken. The National Assembly should enact the law to facilitate this within 6 months. B. Essential constitutional and legal reforms should be immediately commenced to 1. Initiate institutional reforms to provide for an executive that includes the President, Deputy President, Prime Minister, and 2 Deputy Prime Ministers. This will ensure that the presidency is not overbearing and that it is accountable to Parliament through the Prime Minister appearing before the National Assembly while